The Diamond Prajnaparamita Sutra. Thus I heard. At one time, the Buddha was dwelling at Sravasti, in Jet S Grove in Anathapanada S Park, together with a congregation of 1,250 great Bhiksus. At that time, when it became time for the meal, the world-honored one donned his robes, picked up his alms bowl, and entered the great city of Sravasti to collect alms. After he had finished his sequential alms round in the city, he returned to his residence and, after finishing his meal, he put away his robes and bowl, washed his feet, and, arranging his seat, sat down. At that time, the elder, Stavra, Subhuti got up from his seat amid the great congregation. Arranging his robe so as to expose his right shoulder, placing his right knee on the ground, and putting his hands together out of respect, he addressed the Buddha, saying, "How marvelous it is, world-honored one, that the Tathagata shows such great concern for all bodhisattvas and so well favors all bodhisattvas. World-honored one. How should gentlemen and gentlewomen abide in order to generate the aspiration for anuttara samyak sabodhi? How should they quell their minds?" The Buddha replied, "Excellent, excellent, Subhuti. As you have said, the Tathagata does indeed show such great concern for all bodhisattvas and so well favors all bodhisattvas. You now should listen carefully and I will explain this for you. In this wise should gentlemen and gentlewomen abide in order to generate the aspiration for anuttara samyak sabodhi, in this wise should they quell their minds. So be it, world-honored one, we are delighted and look forward to listening." The Buddha addressed Subhuti, "All bodhisattva mahasattvas should in this wise quell their minds, all species of sentient beings, whether oviparous, viviparous, moisture-born, or spontaneously generated, whether material or immaterial, conscious, unconscious, or neither conscious nor unconscious, I will ferry them all across to extinction by enabling them to access the nirvana that is without remainder, anupadissa nirvana. I will in this wise ferry across to extinction limitless, innumerable, and boundless numbers of sentient beings, but in reality there are no sentient beings to be ferried across to extinction. Why is this? Subhuti, if bodhisattvas retain any conception of a self, atmasajana, a person, pujalasajana, a living being, sattvasajana, or a soul, jivasajana, lit. Possessing a lifespan, they are in fact not bodhisattvas. Moreover, Subhuti, bodhisattvas should not stay fixed on any sensory object, dharma, during the practice of giving. This is to say, do not stay fixed on visual objects when making offerings, do not stay fixed on auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, or mental objects when making offerings. Bodhisattvas should make offerings in this manner, without staying fixed on any characteristic of an object. Why is this? If bodhisattvas make offerings without staying fixed on any characteristic, the amount of merit they accrue will be inconceivable. Subhuti, what do you think? Is the amount of space in the east conceivable, or not? It is not, world-honored one. Subhuti, is the amount of space to the south, west, or north, to the intermediate directions, and to the zenith or nadir, conceivable, or not? It is not, world-honored one. Subhuti, it is exactly the same with the amount of merit accrued by bodhisattvas who make offerings without staying fixed on characteristics, it is inconceivable. Subhuti, bodhisattvas should abide just as I have instructed. Subhuti, what do you think? Are you able to see the Tathagata through his physical characteristics? No, world-honored one, it is not possible to see the Tathagata through his physical characteristics. Why is this? This is because the physical characteristics discussed by the Tathagata are in fact not physical characteristics. The Buddha addressed Subhuti, whatever characteristics there may be, all of those are spurious. But if you see that all characteristics are free from characteristics, you will see the Tathagata. Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, "World-honored one. Is it really possible that there will be sentient beings who, having heard these sorts of words and phrases, will be able to give rise to genuine faith, or not?" The Buddha replied to Subhuti, Do not say this. In the final 500 years following the Buddha's extinction, there will be those who, by cultivating merit and keeping the precepts, will be able to generate faith in these words and accept them as genuine. You should know that such people have planted the roots of merit, Kusalamula, not just with one Buddha, 2 Buddhas, or 3, 4, or 5 Buddhas. They have already planted the roots of merit in the presence of incalculable tens of millions of Buddhas, and have heard such words, etc., even up to in a single moment of thought they have generated pure faith. Subhuti, the Tathagata knows all and sees all. These sentient beings have in this wise gained immeasurable merit. Why is this? This is because all these sentient beings retain no further conception of a self, a person, a living being, or a soul. They retain no conception of Dharma and no conception of what is not Dharma. Why is this? If all those sentient beings' minds cling to conceptions, then they would be attached to a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. Why is this? If they cling to a conception of what is Dharma, they will be attached to a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. If they cling to the conception of what is not Dharma, they will be attached to a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. For this reason, you should neither cling to Dharma nor cling to not Dharma. This is why the Tathagata always says, you, Bhiksus, should know that my preaching of the Dharma is like the simile of the raft. You should let go even of what is the Dharma, let alone what is not Dharma. Subhuti, what do you think? Has the Tathagata attained Anuttara Samyak Sabodhi? Has the Tathagata ever taught any Dharma? Subhuti replied, as I understand the meaning of what the Buddha has taught, there is no fixed Dharma called Anuttara Samyak Sabodhi, and there also are no fixed Dharmas that the Tathagata has taught. Why is this? This is because the Dharma that the Tathagata has taught is entirely ungraspable and ineffable. It is neither Dharma nor not Dharma. What is the reason for this? All the sages and saints, Saket Ari Upajala, are distinguished by this uncompounded Dharma. Subhuti, what do you think? Suppose someone were to make offerings of the 7 types of jewels in sufficient numbers to fill the trichiliocosm, would that person gain a massive amount of merit, or not? That would be an awful lot, world-honored one. Why is this? Because that merit has no inherent nature of being merit. For this reason, the Tathagata says that the amount of merit would be massive. Furthermore, if there were a person who accepts and keeps in mind even a single 4-line gatha of the sutra and teaches it to others, his merit would be even great than that. Why is this? Subhuti, it is because all the Buddhas, as well as the Dharma of Anuttara Samyak Sabodhi of all those Buddhas, derive from this sutra. Subhuti, what we call Buddhas and Dharma are not Buddhas or Dharma. Subhuti, what do you think? Can a Srotaspana conceive of the notion, I have achieved the fruition of being a Srotapana, or not? Subhuti replied, no, world-honored one. Why is this? Because a Srotapana is called a Streamenterer, but there is nothing that he has entered. Not entering into visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, or mental objects, this is called a Srotapana. Subhuti, what do you think? Can a Saktagamin conceive of the notion, I have achieved the fruition of being a Saktagamin, or not? Subhuti replied, no, world-honored one. Why is this? Because a Saktagamin is called one who goes and comes once, but in reality there is no such thing as going and coming. This is called a Saktagamin. Subhuti, what do you think? Can an Anagamin conceive of the notion, I have achieved the fruition of being an Anagamin, or not? Subhuti replied, no, world-honored one. Why is this? An Anagamin is called a non-returner, but in reality there is no non-returning. For this reason, one is called an Anagamin. Subhuti, what do you think? Can an Arhat conceive of the notion, I have achieved the path of being an Arhat, or not? Subhuti replied, no, world-honored one. Why is this? Because there is in reality no Dharma called Arhat. World honored one. If an Arhat were to conceive of the idea, I have achieved the Arhat path, then this would in fact entail grasping at a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. World honored one. The Buddha has said that I am foremost among those persons who have achieved the strifeless samadhi, and that I am foremost among the Arhats, who are free of desire. I would not conceive of the idea, I am an Arhat, who is free from desire. World honored one. If I had conceived of the idea, I have achieved the Arhat path, then the world honored one would not have said, Subhuti is one who revels in the practice of arana, seclusion. Since I, Subhuti, in reality engage in no such practice, I am called Subhuti who revels in the practice of arana. The Buddha addressed Subhuti, what do you think? Long ago, when the Tathagata was in the presence of Dipakara Buddha, did he have any attainment in the Dharma, or not? No, world honored one. When the Tathagata was in the presence of Dipakara Buddha, he in fact had no attainment in the Dharma. Subhuti, what do you think? Do bodhisattvas adorn the Buddha land, or not? No, world honored one. Why is this? Because adorning the Buddha land does not in fact adorn anything, this is called adorning. For this reason, Subhuti, all the bodhisattva mahasattvas should in this wise generate pure states of mind. They should not generate states of mind that are fixed on visual objects. They should not generate states of mind that are fixed on auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, or mental objects. They generate states of mind that, even while responding, are not fixed on anything. Subhuti, it is like a person whose body is as large as Sumeru, the king among mountains. What do you think? Would his body be large, or not? Subhuti replied, it would be extraordinary large, world honored one. Why is that? Because the Buddha has said that a non-body is called a large body. Subhuti, suppose there are as many Ganges rivers as there are sands in the Ganges river. What do you think? Would there be a lot of sand in all those Ganges rivers, or not? Subhuti replied, there would be an awful lot, world honored one. Just those Ganges rivers would be innumerable, let alone their grains of sands. Subhuti, I now sincerely ask you, if a gentleman or a gentlewoman were to take as many of the 7 types of jewels as there are trichiliocosms as numerous as the sands of the Ganges and give them as offerings, would they gain a lot of merit, or not? Subhuti said, it would be an awful lot, world honored one. The Buddha said to Subhuti, if a gentleman or a gentlewoman were to accept and keep even a 4-line gatha of the sutra and teach it to others, his or her merit would be even greater than the preceding merit. Furthermore, Subhuti, you should know that all the divinities, human beings, and asuras throughout this world should make offerings at that place where even a 4-line gatha of the sutra is recited, just as if it were a stupa or a shrine of a Buddha, and even more is this case if there is person who is able fully to accept, keep, read, and recite it. Subhuti, you should know that this person masters the most supreme and rarest of dharmas. Wherever the sutra might be, there is found a Buddha or an esteemed disciple. At that time, Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, world honored one, what should we name the sutra? How should we reverently uphold it? The Buddha addressed Subhuti, this sutra is named the Diamond Prajnaparamita and it is under this title that you should reverently retain it. What is the reason for this? Subhuti, the Buddha has taught that the Prajnaparamita is in fact not Prajnaparamita, that is what is called Prajnaparamita. Subhuti, what do you think? Are there any dharmas that the Tathagata has preached, or not? Subhuti replied to the Buddha, world honored one, the Tathagata has preached nothing. Subhuti, are there a lot of dust motes in the trichiliocosm, or not? Subhuti replied, there are an awful lot, world honored one. Subhuti, the Tathagata has explained that dust motes are not dust motes, those are called dust motes. The Tathagata has explained that world systems are not world systems, those are called world systems. Subhuti, what do you think? Is it possible to see the Tathagata through his 32 physical characteristics, or not? No, world-honored one, it is not possible to see the Tathagata through his 32 physical characteristics. Why is this? It is because the Tathagata has explained that the 32 physical characteristics are not the 32 physical characteristics, therefore, they are called the 32 physical characteristics. Subhuti, if there were gentlemen and gentlewomen who made offerings of as many of their bodies as there are sands of the Ganges river, the merit would be greater if there were a person who accepts and keeps even a 4-line gatha of the sutra, and recites it for others. At that time, Subhuti heard the preaching of the sutra and profoundly understood its meaning. Bursting into tears and weeping emotionally, he addressed the Buddha, saying, "How rare it is, world-honored one, for the Buddha to have preached such an incredibly profound sutra. I have never before heard such a sutra through the wisdom that I attained so long ago. World-honored one, if furthermore there were a person who hears the sutra and whose faith is pure, he then and there will generate the mark of reality. You should know that that person accomplishes the rarest of merit. World-honored one, this mark of reality is in fact not a mark. For this reason, the Tathagata calls it a mark of reality. World-honored one, having now heard such a sutra, I have not the slightest difficulty in believing, understanding, receiving, and keeping it. If, in a future age, during the final 500 years, there is a sentient being who is able to hear the sutra and believe, understand, accept, and keep it, he will be the rarest of beings. Why is this? Because that person will have no conception of a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. What is the reason for this? Because a conception of a self is not a conception, conceptions of a person, a living being, and a soul are not conceptions. And why is this? Because leaving behind all conceptions is what is called a Buddha. The Buddha addressed Subhuti, so it is, so it is. If, furthermore, there were a person who heard the sutra and was not startled, frightened, or afraid of it, you should know that that person is extremely rare. Why is this? Subhuti, the Tathagata has explained that the foremost paramita is not the foremost paramita, this is called the foremost paramita. Subhuti, the Tathagata has explained that the paramita of forbearance is not the paramita of forbearance, this is called the paramita of forbearance. Why is this? Subhuti, long ago when King Kalinga was dismembering my body, at that time, I retained no conception of a self, no conception of a person, no conception of a living being, no conception of a soul. Why is this? Long ago, at the time I was being torn limb from limb, if I had retained any conception of a self, a person, a living being, or a soul, I would have felt anger and animosity. Subhuti, I also recall that in the past, 500 lifetimes ago, I was reborn as the sage Kesantavadan. During that lifetime, I retained no conception of a self, no conception of a person, no conception of a living being, and no conception of a soul. For this reason, Subhuti, bodhisattvas should leave behind all conceptions and generate the aspiration for anuttara samyak sabodhi. They should not generate states of mind that are fixed on visual objects, they should not generate states of mind that are fixed on auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile objects. They generate states of mind that, even while responding, are not fixed on anything. If the mind is fixed, this in fact is not being fixed. For this reason, the Buddha explains to the bodhisattvas that they should not make offerings in a state of mind that is fixed on materiality. Subhuti, bodhisattvas should make offerings in this wise so as to benefit all sentient beings. The Tathagata has explained that all characteristics are in fact free from characteristics. He has furthermore explained that all sentient beings are in fact not sentient beings. Subhuti, the Tathagata is one who speaks the truth and speaks of reality, he speaks of things as they are, speaks without deception, and speaks without idiosyncrasy. Subhuti, as for the Dharma attained by the Tathagata, this Dharma is free from both reality and falsity. Subhuti, If a bodhisattva practices giving while fixing his thoughts on sensory objects, dharma, he is like a person who cannot see anything when he is plunged into darkness. If a bodhisattva practices giving without fixing his thoughts on sensory objects, he is like a sighted person who is able to see all sorts of visual objects in the bright sunlight. Subhuti, in future generations, if there are gentlemen and gentlewomen who are able to accept, keep, read, and recite this sutra, the Tathagata will fully know and see with his Buddha wisdom that these people have all accomplished immeasurable, boundless merit. Subhuti, if there were a gentleman or a gentlewoman who, in the morning, made offerings of as many bodies as there are sands in the Ganges river, and at midday again made offerings of as many bodies as there are sands in the Ganges river, and in the evening also made offerings of as many bodies as there are sands in the Ganges river, and in this wise for immeasurable hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and millions of kalpas made offerings of his body, and, furthermore, if there were a person who, hearing this sutra, had faith, and did not reject it, his merit would be even greater than the other persons. And how much more would this be the case for one who copies it out and accepts, keeps, reads, and recites it and explains it to others. Subhuti, the gist is that this sutra contains inconceivable, incalculable, and boundless merit. The Tathagata preaches it for those who aspire to the Mahayana, he preaches it for those who aspire to the supreme vehicle. If there are people who are able to accept, uphold, read, and recite it and explain it widely to others, the Tathagata fully knows and sees that those persons will have all accomplished immeasurable, incalculable, boundless, and inconceivable merit. Such people will be vouchsafed the Tathagata's anuttara samyak sabodhi. Why is this? Subhuti, one who takes pleasure in a lesser dharma will cling to a view of a self, a view of a person, a view of a sentient being, and a view of soul, and will in fact be unable to hear, accept, read, or recite the sutra or explain it to others. Subhuti, all the divinities, human beings, and asuras of this world should make offerings wherever the sutra might be found. You should know that those places are stupas that are worthy of veneration, they should be circumambulated ceremoniously, and decorated with incense and flowers. Furthermore, Subhuti, if a gentleman or gentlewoman who accepts, keeps, reads, and recites the sutra is despised by other people, that person should have fallen into a baleful destiny due to his transgressive karma in a previous lifetime, but because he is someone who is despised in this present life, that transgressive karma from a past lifetime will dissipate and he will attain anuttara samyak sabodhi. Subhuti, I recall that, in the past, for an immeasurable number of asakaya kalpas prior to Dipakara Buddha, I encountered 84 trillion nayotas of Buddhas to whom I made offerings and whom I served without inadvertently skipping over any of them. But, furthermore, if there were a person in the subsequent degenerate age of the Dharma who is able to accept, keep, read, and recite this sutra, the merit he will gain will be 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 1,000,000 times greater than the merit I gained from making offerings to all those Buddhas. It is so much greater that it exceeds any possible analogy for its computation. Subhuti, if I were to fully explain the merit that would be gained by a gentleman or a gentlewoman in the subsequent degenerate age who accepts, keeps, reads, and recites the sutra, the mind of a person who might hear of that would go mad and he would be uncertain and not believe it. Subhuti, you should know that the meaning of the sutra is inconceivable, and its rewards are also inconceivable. At that time, Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, World-honored one, how should a gentleman or gentlewoman who aspires to anuttara samyak sabodhi abide? How should he or she subdue his or her mind? The Buddha replied to Subhuti, if a gentleman or gentlewoman aspires to anuttara samyak sabodhi, he or she should generate this sort of thought, I should ferry all sentient beings across to extinction, but even after ferrying all sentient beings across to extinction, there is not a single sentient being who has in fact been ferried across to extinction. Why is this? If a bodhisattva retains a conception of a self, a conception of a person, a conception of a living being, or a conception of a soul, then he or she is in fact not a bodhisattva. What is the reason for this? Subhuti, there is in reality no dharma that would generate this aspiration for anuttara samyak sabodhi. Subhuti, what do you think? When the Tathagata was in the presence of Dipakara Buddha, did he receive any dharma through which he attained anuttara samyak sabodhi, or not? No, world-honored one. As I understand the meaning of what the Buddha has said, in the presence of Dipakara Buddha, he received no dharma through which he attained anuttara samyak sabodhi. The Buddha said, so it is, so it is. Subhuti, in reality there is no dharma through which the Tathagata attained anuttara samyak sabodhi. Subhuti, if there were a dharma through which the Tathagata attained anuttara samyak sabodhi, Dipakara Buddha would not have made this prediction for me, in a future life, you will become a Buddha by the name of Sakyamuni. But since there was no dharma through which I attained anuttara samyak sabodhi, Dipakara Buddha therefore gave me this prediction with these words, in a future life, you will become a Buddha by the name of Sakyamuni. Why is this? A Tathagata, a thus come one, is one for whom all dharmas have the meaning of being thus. There might be a person who says that the Tathagata attains anuttara samyak sabodhi, subhuti, but in reality there is no dharma through which the Buddha attains anuttara samyak sabodhi. Subhuti, in the anuttara samyak sabodhi that the Tathagata attains, there is nothing that is either real or false. For this reason, the Tathagata says, all dharmas are Buddha dharmas. Subhuti, all dharmas are in fact not all dharmas, therefore, they are called all dharmas. Subhuti, it is like a person whose body is huge. Subhuti said, world-honored one. The Tathagata has explained that a person whose body is huge does not in fact have a large body, this is what is called a large body. Subhuti, it is exactly the same with a bodhisattva, if he or she were to claim, I will ferry across to extinction immeasurable numbers of sentient beings, he would not in fact be called a bodhisattva. Why is this? Subhuti, it is because in reality there is no dharma called bodhisattva. For this reason, the Buddha explains that all dharmas are devoid of self, person, living being, and soul. Subhuti, if a bodhisattva were to say, I will adorn the Buddha land, he would not be called a bodhisattva. Why is this? Because the Tathagata explains that adorning the Buddha land is in fact not adorning anything, this is called adorning. Subhuti, if a bodhisattva fully comprehends that dharmas lack selfhood, the Tathagata says that he genuinely may be called a bodhisattva. Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have a physical eyeball? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has a physical eyeball. Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have the divine eye? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has the divine eye. Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have the wisdom eye? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has the wisdom eye. Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have the dharma eye? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has the dharma eye. Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Tathagata have the Buddha eye? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has the Buddha eye. Subhuti, what do you think? Has the Tathagata said that all the sand in the Ganges river is sand, or not? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, the Tathagata has said it is sand. Subhuti, what do you think? If there were as many Ganges rivers as there is sand in the Ganges river, and there were Buddha's world systems as numerous as the sand in all of those Ganges rivers, would there then be a lot of Buddha worlds, or not? There would be an awful lot, world-honored one. The Buddha said to Subhuti, the Tathagata knows all the types of thought of all the sentient beings in those many lands. Why is this? The Tathagata has said that all their thoughts are free of thought, this is called thought. What is the reason for this? Subhuti, past thoughts are unascertainable, present thoughts are unascertainable, future thoughts are unascertainable. Subhuti, what do you think? Suppose someone were to make offerings of the 7 types of jewels in sufficient numbers to fill the trichiliocosm, would that person gain a lot of merit through those causes and conditions, or not? Yes, indeed, world-honored one, this person would gain an awful lot of merit through those causes and conditions. Subhuti, if that merit were real, the Tathagata would not say that he would gain a lot of merit. But because that merit is non-existent, the Tathagata says that he would gain a lot of merit. Subhuti, what do you think? It is possible for the Buddha to be perceived in the perfection of his physical body, or not? No, world-honored one. One should not look for the Tathagata in the perfection of his physical body. Why is this? The Tathagata has explained that the perfection of the physical body is not the perfection of the physical body, this is called the perfection of the physical body. Subhuti, what do you think? Is it possible to look for the Buddha in the perfection of his physical characteristics, or not? No, world-honored one. One should not look for the Tathagata in the perfection of his physical characteristics. Why is this? The Tathagata has explained that the perfection of the physical characteristics is not the perfection of the physical characteristics, this is called the perfection of the physical characteristics. Subhuti, do not say that the Tathagata thinks, I have a dharma that I will preach. Do not have such a thought. Why is this? If someone were to say, the Tathagata has a dharma that he preaches, he would be slandering the Buddha because of his inability to understand what I have taught. Subhuti, in preaching the dharma, there is no dharma that can be preached, this is called preaching the dharma. At that time, the wise elder, Stavara, Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, World-honored one, might there be sentient beings in the future who will have faith when they hear you preach this dharma? The Buddha replied, Subhuti, they are not sentient beings nor are they not sentient beings. Why is this? Subhuti, the Tathagata has explained that all these various types of sentient beings are not sentient beings, these are called sentient beings. Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, World-honored one, in the Buddha's attainment of Anuttara-Samyaksa-Bodhi, was there nothing that was attained? The Buddha replied, so it is, so it is. Subhuti, in Anuttara-Samyaksa-Bodhi, there is not even the slightest dharma that I could have attained, this is called Anuttara-Samyaksa-Bodhi. Furthermore, Subhuti, this dharma is the same as, Pyngdng, Saket Sama, all others, there is nothing either superior or inferior about it. This is called Anuttara-Samyaksa-Bodhi. If one cultivates all the wholesome dharmas as being free from any sense of a self, a person, a living being, or a soul, one will then attain Anuttara-Samyaksa-Bodhi. Subhuti, the Tathagata has explained that these so-called wholesome dharmas are in fact not wholesome dharmas, these are called wholesome dharmas. Subhuti, if someone were to amass a pile of the 7 types of jewels equal to all the Sumeras, the king of mountains, throughout the Trichiliocosm and use that to make offerings, or if there were someone who was able to accept, keep, read, and recite even a 4-line gatha of this Prajnaparamita Sutra and teach it to others, that person's merit will be 100, 1,000, 10,000, or 1,000,000 times greater than that preceding merit, it is so much greater that it exceeds any possible analogy for its computation. Subhuti, what do you think? None of you should say that the Tathagata thinks, I will save sentient beings. Subhuti, do not think this. Why is this? There are in reality no sentient beings that the Tathagata saves, for if there were sentient beings that the Tathagata saves, then the Tathagata would retain a sense of a self, a person, a living being, and a soul. Subhuti, the Tathagata explains that the existence of a self is in fact not the existence of a self, but ordinary persons, Thajana, all presume that there is a self. Subhuti, the Tathagata explains that these so-called ordinary persons are in fact not ordinary persons, these are called ordinary persons. Subhuti, what do you think? Is it possible to recognize the Tathagata through his 32 physical characteristics, or not? Subhuti replied, so it is, so it is. The Tathagata may be identified through his 32 physical characteristics. The Buddha said, Subhuti, if it were possible to identify the Tathagata through his 32 physical characteristics, then a wheel-turning holy Emperor Cakravartin, who also possesses these same characteristics, would in fact be a Tathagata. Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, "World-honored one, as I understand the meaning of what you have said, one should not identify the Tathagata through his 32 physical characteristics." At that time, the world-honored one spoke Agatha. "Those who look for me in my physical form, or seek me in the sound of my voice, those people practice a perverse path. They will never be able to see the Tathagata." Subhuti, you might think, it was not through the perfection of his physical characteristics that the Tathagata attained Anuttara Samyak Bodhi. Subhuti, do not think this thought, it was not through the perfection of his physical characteristics that the Tathagata attained Anuttara Samyak Bodhi. Subhuti, if you were to think this thought, then the aspiration for Anuttara Samyak Bodhi would advocate that all dharmas are extinguished. Do not think this thought. Why is this? Those who have developed the aspiration for Anuttara Samyak Bodhi are not advocating this characteristic of extinction with regard to a dharma. Subhuti, suppose a bodhisattva were to make offerings of the 7 types of jewels in sufficient numbers to fill world systems as numerous as the sands of the Ganges river. Furthermore, if there were a person who knows that all dharmas are non-self and perfect forbearance, the merit gained by this bodhisattva would be far superior to that of the preceding bodhisattva. Why is this? Subhuti, it is because all bodhisattvas do not acquire merit. Subhuti addressed the Buddha, saying, "World-honored one, why is it that bodhisattvas do not acquire merit?" Subhuti, bodhisattvas should not cling to the merit they have made. For this reason, I say that they do not acquire merit. Subhuti, if someone were to say, the Tathagata comes and goes, he sits and lies down, then this person does not understand the meaning of what I have said. Why is this? The Tathagata neither comes from somewhere nor goes somewhere, therefore, he is called a thus come one, Tathagata. Subhuti, suppose a gentleman or a gentlewoman were to pulverize the world systems of trichiliocosm into the finest of dust motes. What do you think? Would there be a lot of dust motes, or not? There would be an awful lot, world-honored one. Why is this? If all those finest of dust motes existed in reality, the Buddha would not have said that they are the finest of dust motes. What is the reason for this? The Buddha explains that the finest of dust motes are not in fact dust motes, this is called the finest of dust motes. World-honored one, what the Tathagata described as the world systems of the trichiliocosm are in fact not world systems, therefore, they are called world systems. Why is this? If those world systems existed in reality, then they would be marked by a composite quality. But the Tathagata has explained that a composite quality is in fact not a composite quality, this is called a composite quality. Subhuti, this composite quality is in fact ineffable, and yet ordinary persons cling to such phenomena. Subhuti, suppose someone were to say, the Buddha preaches the view of a self, the view of a person, the view of a living being, and the view of a soul. Subhuti, what do you think? Has this person understood the meaning of what I have preached, or not? No, world-honored one, this person has not understood the meaning of what the Tathagata has preached. Why is this? The world-honored one preaches that the view of a self, the view of a person, the view of a living being, and the view of a soul are not the view of a self, the view of a person, the view of a living being, and the view of a soul. This is called the view of a self, the view of a person, the view of a living being, and the view of a soul. Subhuti, those who aspire to Anuttara Samyak Bodhi should in this wise know all dharmas, in this wise view them and in this wise believe in and understand them, they should not generate any characteristics of dharmas. Subhuti, the Tathagata has said that these so-called characteristics of dharmas are in fact not characteristics of dharmas, therefore, they are called characteristics of dharmas. Subhuti, if someone were to make offerings of the 7 types of jewels in sufficient numbers to fill an asakaya infinite number of world systems, or, If gentlemen and gentlewomen who had aroused the aspiration for Bodhi retained even a 4-line verse of the sutra and were to accept, keep, read, and recite it and explain it to others, their merit would be greater than that of the other one. How should one explain it to others? Do not grasp at its characteristics, remain just so and unmoving. Why is this? All compounded dharmas are like a dream, a mirage, a bubble, and a shadow, they are like dew and like lightning. So should you view them. After the Buddha had finished preaching the sutra, the elder Subhuti, all the bhiksus and bhiksunis, the upasakayas and upasikas, and all the divinities, humans, and asuras of this world heard what the Buddha had preached and were all ecstatic. They accepted it in faith and practiced it respectfully.